AGI. So that means that for that household that has $100,000 adjusted gross income, every dollar above $7,500 is a medical expense dollar that they put on the itemized deductions. And so we're going to talk about how do we get that number high enough to make it sense for you as a parent or couple to use medical expenses as deductions. And so we'll talk about some of these expenses. So that's the first thing, is you have to clear that 7.5% threshold before you start claiming these dollars as medical expenses.
Brian?
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. There is one question in the chat. And the question is therapy from a psychologist or counselor considered medical expenses?
Depends on how it was recommended, but typically like 9 times out of 10, yes. And we're going to talk about that. And so the therapy from the psychologist or counselor, as long as it's not reimbursed by insurance, you can claim that cost. So we'll talk about that, but 9 times out of 10, that's a very, very common expense there. So medical expense may include any amount paid for diagnosis, curing, mitigation, treatment, prevention of diseases, so sicknesses. So we're not necessarily saying it always has to be the young adult with special needs that has to have the expense tied to them. This is mom and dad, brother and sister. This is anything. Transportation is a big one, which we'll talk about. How do we write off transportation for medical expenses? A lot of the overlooked expenses here would be medical care, which that question and would qualify based off of how it's written in the doctor file under medical care. Again, private schools with special curriculum, and we're going to talk about that. So like Westview, Monarch, even non-specialized schools that have special curriculums for individuals that maybe have Down syndrome or on the spectrum or CP. We'll talk about that as well. And then medical conferences and seminars are again often overlooked expenses. So this is a not common one, but when planned correctly is a really, really big one. And I'll give some real world examples that my client has done, a couple of clients have done, and my own family, my mother has done. So permanent improvements to the taxpayer's residence or office. So the deduction is permitted to the extent of the medical cost for the improvement exceeds the increase in the home's fair market value. So let me give you some examples of this. And I think on the next slide, there will be some examples as well. So I'm gonna go to the next slide and come back. So some of these examples would be like adding railings. So someone who needs assistance in maneuvering the household, lowering cabinets so that they're more accessible for the young adult with special needs. Bathing facilities is a big one. My mom has this right now. She's going through the state right now because my brother's in a wheelchair, and then he has to have a big enough bath for his wheelchair to go into to get bathed. So altering bathing facilities is a real world example that we see quite often. Widening doorways and halls. Sometimes we see this in the older homes that families purchase, kind of remodel and widen doorways for wheelchairs. Interest ramps are a big one. We had a client who, don't assume that this is going to be done, but we had a client who daughter and husband needed aquatherapy. So they had a pool put in the backyard, and they were able, after everything's said and done, get $26,000 back on their taxes. So there is other examples of this. My rule of thumb is always get a certified medical doctor to recommend whatever, expansion onto the house, modification to the house, improvements to the house. Make sure a medical doctor approves it first, because that has to be approved first. Then what we do is look at the fair market value increase of the home and take the difference. And so that's what this example is. And so in this example, If you had to redo your AC system because the young adult with special needs has respiratory illness. And so my mom had to rip up, a real example is my mom ripped up all of her carpets because my brother's immune system is very low. The doctor recommended it. So we put all wood floors in because my mom has 2 dogs. So this is kind of a real world example here is we took the cost of the AC system, $15,000, because it was an improvement and it was new. The fair market value of the house went up $6,000. So we can't claim all 15,000. You just can't do that. But we can claim the difference between the cost and the increase in the fair market value. And so that's that $9,000 here. And so that was like the pool, for example. We can't take every single dollar for the installation of the pool, the changing of the landscape, the monthly cost, because there's a fair market value. Homes with pools are a little bit more valuable. But you can take the difference between the cost and the increase of the fair market value of your home. So widening doors. And so sometimes the way you do this is you get an appraisal of the house before and appraisal of the house afterwards. If you've got real estate folks that you work with, if not, we can refer you to a few. But this is where you get your number. And so anytime you're thinking about doing some improvements, you're a young adult with special needs, you're thinking about modifying a residence for them because they want to start living on their own, or maybe they want to start living in their own, silo of the house, and you want to make changes. Think about adding this all together in the same tax year so you can get your biggest bang for your buck back on your tax return. Okay. Any questions on kind of this formula or permanent modifications to the house? No? Okay. Let me put another cough drop in and I'll keep on going. Some overlooked, some very, very common overlooked eligible medical expenses are listed here. Some of the ones that we see the most recently, just kind of I wouldn't call it a fad, but just a movement through our community is really the vitamin therapy or the special diets that we start seeing. The more research that comes out, the fruit, the corn syrup and the sugar in the diets and having to change diets to help young adults kind of focus, that if a medical doctor recommends that is considered an eligible medical expense, that cost difference of that type of diet. Oh, that was just Ingrid, sorry. Guide animals, music therapy, play therapy, equestrian therapy, essentially any type of therapy or behavioral reinforcement or assistance that isn't covered by insurance or isn't reimbursed by insurance. You can talk to your doctor. Again, always make sure the medical doctor puts it in the file first and then start claiming it as a medical expense. So special schools. Christina, do you have a question? I just saw you come off mute.
I was just gonna ask, when you say that the doctor has to put it on the file first, any of those should go with whatever the doctor recommends? You mean it has to be documented so you can put it on your tax returns?
Yeah, so when it comes to like qualifying the expense from an IRS perspective, the IRS isn't just gonna be like, oh, well, mom knows best, she's doing these new CBD pills or, X, Y, and Z therapies that hasn't been, proven or researched, and now she's claiming it as an expense. No, the IRS is gonna first ask for the medical doctor's recommendation,
right?
Which typically most of our families always have that good relationship and just tell the medical doctor, hey, do you mind writing up a little paragraph saying you recommend this for my child? And then we take that to the CPA with the expenses and say, hey, look, based off of, and we're going to talk about like the IRS and the POMS codes, based off of this POMS code, this recommendation, this expense is allowed to be taken out.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's really, really hard to go back and change it because the CPA has to be willing to amend your tax returns, and you can only do that for so many years. And it has to be worthwhile too. Like just to claim a medical expense just to save, $30, is it really worth the hassle to go back and change a tax return 2 years ago or whatnot?
Right.
So
Thank
always
you.
get that started first. No problem. So special school. So again, if a medical doctor recommends a school setting because it's going to enhance that individual's progression or situation, or um, if a school has a separate specialized curriculum for that young adult with special needs, that school's tuition and all the expenses get counted as a medical expense. And I think you'll see it here in a second, but a special school does not have to be designated as a special school for everyone that attends that school. A special school can be designated for one child, and the child next to them, their peer, might not qualify. Because again, it's about the curriculum. Is it a special curriculum for that young adult with special needs? And that's what you'll see here. This is a revenue ruling. So revenue ruling 70-285. This is where a lot of the families that pay for these private schools or kindergarten or preschool or after school programs where this is a really big expense that's overlooked. This allows you to capture those dollars if you itemize here. So this is another thing down here, another bullet point. So special schools with programs to quote mainstream children with intellectual disabilities, tuition related fees are a deductible medical expense. So again, programs, when I see that and want to bring this into the real world, that would be like after school programs that maybe your young adult goes to for behavioral reinforcement or just tutoring programs, which we'll talk about private tutors here in a second. All those costs are medical expense if recommended by a medical doctor. And I'm going to say that 10,000 more times because I want to make sure you guys do that first. Private tutoring by a specially trained teacher. That revenue ruling here is a medical expense. And so if your young adult's in high school and needs additional reinforcement outside the classroom, on the weekends, outside normal hours, again, those costs are included. And I can't think, Mary Jane would know this school that, oh my gosh, it's driving me insane, but they've partnered with us before and they're over here in the Galleria, but they do these types of programs where they help kids kind of get back on track or learn a little bit faster to get back up to grade level. That cost, because it's a private cost, is considered a medical expense. These are, and again, this is a recorded workshop, so you'll be able to see these slides, but these are the rulings that if your CPA is like, I'm not too sure about that, you can always cite these rulings for them and just help them, because not every CPA knows the ins and outs of medical expenses, and that's just common. So it's really your job as a parent to let them know, hey, by the way, I've got the doctor's recommendation and I've got the revenue ruling, so let's go ahead and count this as an expense here. Any questions so far before I go into this slide? Perfect. So again,
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Hey, Ann, how are you?
I have a question. I was trying to type it. This is Ann. Yes, thank you. I was wondering regarding a homeschooled student, that if in addition to the homeschool the parent is doing, then if recommended and documented by the physician first, could the tutoring for therapeutic and behavioral support still apply?
That's a good question. I don't know. So because I don't know, and I've got to reread this revenue ruling, if the tutor has to be like certified, and I don't know a lot about homeschooling, so forgive me for my ignorance when it comes to homeschooling. But if you have to get certified as a homeschool for a parent to be a homeschool teacher or specialist at home, like I assume if you do have to go through qualifications testing or or just get certified that it would count. If you don't, I can double check or try to double check.
Well, I can tell you that in Texas, homeschool is considered private school. So I'm not asking for the parent to be reimbursed in any way, but if the physician recommended outside of what the parent's doing. So it would pretty much be the same thing that if my child went to Monarch School and then the physician recommended this therapeutic or behavioral support with a private tutor, it would be the separate person, not the parent. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So where would the cost come from though? Like what costs are you writing off from a homeschool?
No, it doesn't, the question isn't writing it off for homeschool. The question is about it seems to me it should still apply, not that if it's a private tutoring that's supplemental to the day-to-day homeschool curriculum. So
Right.
that there's no like discrimination. Is this well, the IRS is federal. But in Texas, homeschool is considered a private school. Literally, like I homeschool my daughter, but
And I get that, but my question is what's the, like, if you're homeschooling your daughter, there's got to be a cost. Like, so are you asking like the cost to homeschool your daughter?
No, I'm talking about the first point, private tutoring by a specially trained teacher. I'm really asking, is there discrimination against homeschooling? Because in Texas, it's considered a private school. So it should be. And so if you go to Monarch School and the doctor says, well, I recommend private tutoring in addition to Monarch, so not straight up Monarch, but the additional tutoring.
Right.
So this, in the same way, I'm homeschooling, my child, blah, blah, blah. And then in addition to what I'm doing, the doctor says, a certified therapist, behavior specialist, I recommend that for your daughter. So
Right.
and so that's what I'm asking about, is the private tutoring. And in Texas, my daughter's still enrolled as a private school student accessing speech therapy. So she's enrolled in Cy-Fair ISD, and we're accessing the school services for speech therapy.
So, but Anne, is there a cost associated to any of that?
Well,
And
yeah. Mary
probably,
Jane?
and this is Mary Jane, it's probably the cost of your tutoring that you're asking about.
Yes, that's what I'm asking. The point number one, private tutoring that's not the parent.
Yes, but that's something that the doctor recommended, so I'd assume it would be a medical expense.
Right. And also, I guess I'm, also asking if there's anything like, you have special schools, you have regular schools that have special curriculum, and then you have, homeschool that, some places discriminate more against homeschooling. And Texas is actually a freer state, as I understand it. So that's really what I'm asking.
So, Anne, is it possible that Brian can get back with you with that
Yeah,
question? No problems.
Yeah, that's fine. And I can send him an email.
Okay.
Regarding that too.
Email with really the question. I'll do my best to get you the answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I have another question, Brian. It's about private activity day programs. Are they also included?
Yes, Mary Jane, if there are paid for out of pocket, if first, again, recommended by a medical professional. Two, if they're paid for dollars out of, in this situation, I'm assuming, your pocket, they're paid for out of your pocket and they're not reimbursed by medical insurance, then yes, they are considered a medical expense. Because you can get the medical doctor to say that the curriculum in this specific situation or environment is going to benefit, Christopher or whoever. So yes, that is a very common one because some day have programs are, private pay. Any other questions? Okay. So if an institution, which we kind of spent a little time on and talked about, but so if a school day have program, special setting and a general format when it comes to education qualifies as a special school for that young adult with special needs, the lodging, if there's lodging, any out-of-pocket expenses for meals, transportation, 16 cents to and from, school, any incidental costs associated with that institution, so books, electronic devices, any of those incidental costs, if there's additional costs for supervision or care, that is considered, and that all gets added together as a medical expense for deduction purposes. And so there are some situations here. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but there are some situations where sometimes insurance will cover a portion of the school and sometimes they won't cover all of it. Sometimes schools will break out school tuition and supervision costs. And so you want to keep an eye out for that when it comes to tax purposes for adding up, just depending on if it's, a special school or not, and or if insurance covers it. So sorry, I'm reading a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering. Yeah, she has a question about diapers, I guess, having to
use diapers, and I use seven size. Teacher asked me to pull up, so really expensive. I do not qualify there. So that one's a really interesting one. So when it comes to your son that needs the more expensive diapers, I've got to double check to see if that diaper is a medical expense. I should just ask my mom because my brother is still in diapers. So I don't know that answer. I mean, that's a really good one that trumped me. So let me, Ingrid, can you take a note of that for me? Because I don't have a notepad, and I will do my best to find that answer for you.
Okay, I have it.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Because I've gotta ask about that. All right. So medical conferences and seminars. So the government allows both transportation and cost to be added up for medical expense purposes and be deducted for seminars. Again, we really typically only see this when a family first gets the diagnosis and wants to learn more about the child situation, wants to get as much information and resources as possible, because a doctor has to recommend, you should go to the Autism Speaks conference, or you should go to the National CP Symposium. So if a doctor recommends that, then the transportation and costs for the seminar, so if there's registration fees, that all gets added into a total cost. So again, we don't see this too often, but for the younger parents out there that might just have recently got a diagnosis, keep this in mind and maybe ask your doctor if there's any, Baylor College of Medicine usually has a pretty good, list of, hey, you should go see X, Y, and Z. Texas Children's, all that fun stuff. I guess Baylor College of Medicine won't really come in play until they're older, but just keep this in mind from a seminar standpoint. The biggest point here, though, is the bottom. Meals and lodging are not deductible. So you can't go to like Ruth Chris and just blow it out on a conference because you're away for the weekend, trying to enjoy one last free weekend. You can't do that. And you can't go stay at the Westin and write off every single penny and order room service. So again, it's transportation and costs right there. 16 cents in 2021. Listen, I'm a financial guy. Inflation was 7% last year. Do not ask me why it went from 17 cents in 2020 to 16 cents in 2021. I'm just the deliverer of the news. But it was 16 cents for last year. So 16 cents to and from medical appointments, to and from special schools, to and from therapies. They have programs, 16 cents. So Houston, that adds up because we're a pretty big city and we usually commute across town for things. When it comes to medical travel, so this is a situation when it comes for like treatment or therapy, or I have a client who travels out or used to travel halfway across the country to see specialists in other states for their sons. This situation here would come into play where the transportation cost for both persons. So the example down here would be, Miss Smith, which is ironic, it's my last name, lives in Boston, which is a great city, takes her child to Philadelphia for medical treatment. The transportation cost for both people, so herself and her son, and up to $50 per night for each individual is deducted for medical travel, not medical conferences. Remember, you can't write off lodging and food for conferences, but for medical travel. So you'll see this a lot as well in Houston specifically, people commuting from across the country to come and receive treatment here in Houston in the medical center. So if you do that, if you commute from out of the city or you commute out of the state here to Houston, remember transportation costs for both people and up to $50 per night per person is an expense that you can write off. There's a couple questions here in the chat.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, the one parent is asking about IRWE and then the 1099.
So, Anna, we're about to talk about impairment-related work expenses in probably like 3 or 4 slides. So I'll talk about that here in a sec. And how do we report to SSA to increases SSI? Any parents out there with an EHL child?
Fantastic, Brian. I just wanted to take the opportunity to put it out there. I could, get with you one-on-one, but I thought if there are any other parents out there who have an adult child who's working, maybe they could very easily explain or walk me through what we need to do, because I want to report it to SSI, of course, and I want to make sure that I'm doing it properly with reporting the deduction on Alex's tax return and also on ours. So I know you're getting to it. Thank you so much.
No, I think what we'll do when we get to that slide too is we'll open it up because I think that's a great opportunity for other parents that might be in the same situation, Anna, to give their situation. I'll explain what IRWEs are, what the benefits are, and then see if there's any parents out there that would like to kind of say if they've ever, used those for their young adult. So we'll talk about that here in a second, Anna. So for mileage, can we use Google Maps for mileage, or do we still need to track the odometer on the vehicle? I'm going to give you the legal answer, and it's the most annoying answer, is yes, you technically need to track it on the odometer. Refer to your CPA on what they are comfortable with on how you track. Some CPAs will say, look, just show me where your house is, where the place is, how often they go, and show me their schedule. And that's easy to prove. Some CPAs will only say, look, you have to take a picture of your speedometer before and speedometer after, and you've got to keep file of that. So it just comes down to your CPA. I had a CPA years ago because I commuted from the Woodlands to Katy for work that wanted pictures. So it comes down to preference, because at the end of the day, the CPA is signing off on your taxes. So you'll have to ask them specifically, but my answer, just to play it safe, is you have to track it on your odometer. Any other questions? Awesome. So this one, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. I'll kind of talk while I let you guys read, but this is just the way of either claiming or get reimbursed, or how do you report if you claim medical expenses and then get reimbursed either from insurance or a school district. Because again, I am not saying to do this. I am not even going to want to talk about this, but you can place your kid in a private school in the public school system, pay for it if they're not given the right services or supporting your child. That's a whole nother issue, but that is very common in the Northeast. And so the school district will actually pay for tuition for your young adult to go to a different school. But this talks about what to do if you do get reimbursed and how to claim that and how to fix it. Because again, you cannot claim a deduction 100% and get reimbursed 100%. You will get in trouble if you ever get audited. And so that's what this slide is about here. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because we don't come across this very often down here. So the next few slides, which Anna, not this slide, but the next slide is impairment related work expenses. The next few slides are going to talk about some benefits, like what can you do as a parent to stay ahead of the game when it comes to taxes, be more tax efficient when it comes to saving and spending money on expenses for taxes. And again, of course, the credits, which we'll talk about. So one of the one things that we always recommend families utilize if they have the ability to through their employer is utilize flexible savings accounts and health savings accounts, health spending account, I should say. These accounts are extremely beneficial for a lot of our families. I'm a big proponent of HSAs. If you have an HSA, my typical recommendation is max it out. It helps for taxes now. It helps for taxes in the future for medical expenses. And you can continue to roll over the HSA moving forward, which is nice because you might not have a procedure this year or next year or in 5 years, but maybe down the line, there's going to be a procedure either on yourself, your spouse, or your dependents, and you are going to need some money. These are great accounts to take advantage of. Again, these are going to be through your employer. So take a look through your employee handbook, make sure there's an option for it and utilize it if possible. Typically, you'll see employers match HSA contributions as well. So there's some free dollars on the table as well if you're not utilizing your HSA through work. So here comes the fun conversation, impairment related work expenses, IRWE. So impairment related work expenses can be utilized for individuals with special needs that are working, but also receiving either SSI or SSDI, RSDI benefits. And what impairment related work expenses are, was that a question or is that someone threw me off? Sorry. What impairment related work expenses are is this first part, and it's very important that we stick to this definition. Represent ordinary and necessary business expense that are necessary for that young adult to perform their work. So think prescriptions, communication devices, goods and services not required or used other than incidentally in your personal activities and not specifically covered under other income tax laws. So IRWEs are a really good way for our young adults to stay below certain thresholds once we apply the IRWEs to maintain benefits. Common examples, the two ones I just mentioned are very common: prescriptions and communication devices. Other ones would be job coaches, job aids, therapy dogs, service dogs to help them maintain focus, and any extracurricular expense that allows them to perform their job. Transportation costs count as an IRWE. If you are having to drive them to and from work, that mileage will ride up and as a medical expense. If they Uber, they take the metro, if they pay for it. If, we don't take trains around here, so we don't have to worry about that. But those are transportation costs that, again, if they need those costs to perform, or they need Uber because they can't drive themselves, that gets to drop their reportable income to SSA, not reportable income, excuse me, calculation. When they calculate the benefit that they receive, either at SSI or RSDI, SSDI amounts, that helps them receive more dollars and stay below those thresholds. Anna, do you want to kind of open it up and kind of ask your certain situation and see what? Yeah, so Mary
Okay,
Jane.
sure, of course. So my son works and he is unable to commute to work because of, public transportation. So we have to drive him. So regarding Irwi, he has to, it would, if we included the travel or the expense of my husband and I driving him to and from work, it would increase his SSI. So I understand that, but will Alex have to then issue us a 1099 miscellaneous? So is it reportable income on our end in order for Alex to then claim a deduction on his end? And then let's just start with that for now. There's something else I have to ask, but I've forgotten it for right now.
So Mary Jane, do you want to take a stab at this? Because you put a really good comment in the chat. I don't know if you're busy or you want me to read it.
So the person with the disability technically has to pay for the impairment related work expense. So that means that you're taking that person is paying for service. So like for my son, if he pays for Uber, that sort of thing, technically, if you're driving them, he's supposed to be paying you. But 1099, that's a really ridiculous. I can't imagine getting into that situation. But if the person is paying you, I don't think you'd be able to then deduct it as a medical expense. I don't know, Brian.
We don't claim him at all. He's not a dependent of ours. He is.
Well, and my son isn't a dependent either. We have IRWs that reduce so that he gets more SSI and he keeps his Medicaid, but he doesn't put that on his taxes. Those IRWs, we don't claim them on ours as a medical expense. So I'm not sure where you're going with it.
I don't want to trouble myself with all of that, IRS stuff. I only want to simply, Alex could actually work more. That's part of my line of questioning. He's at the threshold where he almost is going to lose his SSI and his Medicaid. So if we were able to include some IRWI, he would be able to work more. He would not have, such an issue with losing possibly Medicaid, which is the most important part. So that's why I want to include the travel expense that my husband and I, for getting him to work. That's all I want to do. But then I understand that, translates into, a deduction on his tax return. I don't even know if he has to file a tax return because it's the first year he actually made a bit of money in 2021. So here I am, January 31st, and I reached out to a tax person, and they explained to us that Alex would be able to, write off the expense, but then we would have to report it as income. I don't want to do that, Mary Jane.
Oh, no. And it's not going to be that much income. I mean, my son only ended up having to file his own tax return was due to the fact that he earned, because of SSDI, more than $6,000 or something. So that's why he ended up being not under our tax return. But he can't then claim that. First off, it's not even going to be up to 7% of his income. So the work incentives are not. So, I mean, it's not, it's immaterial, but maybe we can have this conversation separately.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Mary Jane, for that.
We had a question. Christina, who was it that you were asking me about?
We have a question from Rudolph. Is there an easy way to compare it? If it is beneficial to switch to an HSA instead of a PPO? Concerned about out-of-pocket costs and don't know how to resolve.
So Rudolph, I can get you in touch with a health insurance person. That is not my specialty when it comes to like PPOs and going into the cost analysis. Mine is really from a planning perspective for tax purposes and for future purposes. I can get you in touch with someone, but I'm not going to know that answer, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Okay, and there's another question from Carla. What if I'm paying for a job coach for an unpaid internship for my adult child and my adult child is not receiving SSI?
That's a good one. That's a good question. So if you're paying for a job coach and your son's not getting paid, what are we using the IRWI against or for? Would be, I guess, my question to that. If they're not receiving SSI, is there a reason why your son's not receiving SSI, Carla?
So originally did not qualify for SSI. Originally did have a paying job. It wasn't, enough, but had too many assets for SSI. And when we applied for SSDI this year, under my husband's SSDI, Social Security rejected that. And we might appeal because we just got the rejection, but at the same time, I wasn't super surprised because my son can drive, and like I said, prior to COVID, had a paying job. It was part-time, but a lawyer had just informally told me, might be hard to get qualified. But my son is autistic, so other my friends were like, no, surely he'll qualify. So like I said, we might appeal, but had this chance for an unpaid internship that I thought would be really great experience. But I also thought a job coach would be necessary, and just due to the delay in getting a job coach through Texas Workforce, I've been paying for the job coach until we get the other things. And I don't even know if Texas Workforce would provide one for an unpaid internship. I haven't really gone there yet. It's kind of a weird year for us, I think.
It's hopefully going to be a good year though, where you.
I hope, yeah.
Win. So like at face of the question, I would just question like what. There's not really like.
So I guess, yeah, that is really my question. Since my son isn't making any money, is there a way for me to deduct that as an expense? But it sounds like no.
Yeah, unless there's a way that the medical doctor somehow writes it, but I don't see that, and I don't see the connected dots there, just because it's an unpaid internship and it's not really a therapeutic situation or a medical situation. It's more of just like
more like job training.
Yeah.
Okay. So if it turns into a paid internship.
But again, with SSI and what Mary Jane was talking about, your son would have to pay that expense, not you.
Right.
So
and that would be if he qualified for SSDI on appeal. Okay. That all makes sense to me. Thank you.
All right, let me move through here because we're coming up on 1 o'clock.
Yes.
So these are some tax credits. So again, earned income tax credits. high level, this credit is supposed to help offset Social Security taxes on lower income families. You'll see at the very bottom, $543 for no children, $3,600 for one, $59, and then $6,700 for three or more. This is a credit. This is a dollar for dollar offset of taxes due depending on your family size and depending on your AGI. So your AGI, which is, again, your adjusted gross income, the credit is completely phased out if your AGI is greater than $48,108 for a taxpayer married filing jointly. There is no credit allowed if your investment income, so if you have investments on the side, is greater than $3,650 a year. So keep that in mind for this tax credit. But again, ask your CPA if you feel like you might qualify for this tax credit. Ask them if you should take advantage of it. You technically should. Adoption credits. This is a very, very large one. This is limited per child, not per year. There's a 5-year carryover for these credits. And this is if you are adopting a child, regardless if the expense must be a U.S. citizen or resident and require adoption assistance. So what this means is you can't just adopt a non-citizen and claim this expense. But this credit for 2021 is $14,440. My wife and I are looking at adopting. We looked at the numbers because we were putting pen to paper last night, and it's like $60,000. So yes, in the state of Texas, please, if you are adopting or you have adopted in the past, this is one of the potential reasons why you would want to go back and redo a tax return in the past, is this tax credit if you've adopted a child or if you know someone who is going to adopt a child. There are phase outs of this, however.
Brian, before you get started on the next slide, I wanted to ask everyone if you need to disconnect, go ahead. We will, but if you want to stay on and you have some questions, go ahead and hold on to those questions and we'll answer them at the end if you're still connected with us. And don't forget to complete the survey. Thank you.
Here are the phase outs of income. So completely phased out if your household income is above 256. If you're below 216, then you get the full amount. If you're somewhere in between, you get a blend of the 14,000, not all. Speed through. Dependent care credit. Again, this is what the numbers look like. So this is if you have costs like daycare costs, nanny costs for you to work, this is what a child independent care credit looks like. 3,000 for one individual, 6,000 for two or more. Your AGI has to be fairly low though on this. So again, it might not be for everyone on the call. Talk to your CPA if you feel like you might qualify for a credit. If your AGI is fairly low, $43,000 or less, you could get some dollars back for daycare cost, for nanny cost, those types of things. So we're done. Like Inger said, please fill out the survey. Again, today was an extremely in the weeds. It's never typically like this, but it is taxes and it is numbers, and they're always changing. So please fill out the survey. Let us know pros, cons, answer the questions. Inger, the next one's next month, correct? Oh,
Right.
you're muted.
You're in mute, Edgar. Next month, it'll be March 17, and we have a talk about SSI, which is a really interesting topic with our very own Mary Jane Williams. So anybody that is interested, you can go and register. You'll find it on our website calendar.
All right.
Now-
Inger, I'm gonna stop sharing if you could share, because I gotta hop off. I'm a little late. to a
Okay,
meeting.
so
Debbie's 17th, not March 17th.
Yes, February.
Oh, sorry. Yes, February 17th.
Well, I
And
wanna
also
say-
March 17th, there's another one, so you can
Yes.
sign up already. Thank you.
You may have also gotten the schedule because I sent the information. I just remind people that has registered for. Bye, Brian. Thank you
Bye,
so
guys.
much. If y'all have any questions for Brian's, email us and we will definitely get that information to him so he can answer that question for you.
Bye, all.
Bye. So just know the schedule is out there for, I think I emailed it to everybody in the campaign. So you do have that with the dates. Okay, and we thank you so much for attending this training. You have a wonderful day and we'll see you February 17th,
Thank you
same
so much.
time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.